Hi folks, I'm smoking my St George's Day pipe in honour of St George, and in it I've got some Boswell's Northwood. The other day I told you a bit about my early life, and I want to tell you a bit more about that. But it's not very nice, so if you want to skip this video, please feel free to do so. When I was very young, and my mum and dad were newly married, Dad was a very, very violent man. I mean, he was all through his life a very strong and violent man. But when I was a child, he was particularly bad to Mum. He desperately wanted a child of his own, and he wanted a little girl because he didn't like little boys much. But he'd taken me and Mum on and looked after us and provided for us very well. But he had the habit of beating Mum, and he caused her to have 3 miscarriages. As far as I know, they were all boys. One of them lived long enough to breathe, or seemed to breathe. He took that child to the church, went to the church and tried to arrange a burial. And at that time the church, or some ministers, didn't believe a child who hadn't breathed had a soul, or was, it was just, that was it. So the vicar of this particular church said, well, you can't have a funeral and you can't bury the child in a churchyard. But what I'll do is I'll give you a box and you can bury it in the field just over the fence there. And from that day onwards, Dad had nothing to do with the church, which made it difficult when I became a priest. But anyway, that was that bit. He was also, he loved animals more than he did people. And he had this old Labrador bitch. She was very old. And as punishment, what he would do to me was lock me up in the kennel overnight. I think the longest time I stayed in the kennel was for 3 nights. God knows what I'd done to deserve that. I mean, I wasn't even 5 years old. So I used to sleep with the dog. And I don't know whether you know Labradors, but they have a distinctive body smell. Not unpleasant. But I always remember that smell of the old dog and me laying against her and her looking after me in a way. Once when I was in a parish, this house I went to visit had 3 Labradors. And the lady went out to make a cup of tea. And while she was out, I thought I'd have a quick sniff of the Labrador's back, one of the Labradors. unfortunately, she came in just as I was going, and what are you doing? Do my dogs smell? So I explained to her that they reminded me of my childhood. Having said he was a violent man and he didn't like boys, he was in a way very proud of me, but I just puzzled him. And I think to a certain extent I puzzled my mother, because I just wasn't like either of them. From very early on, I just thought differently to them and to most people I knew. I mean, to give you an example, Dad would say about a really nice, tasty piece of food, it was very Moorish. And I used to think, what's it got to do with the Arabs, the blackamoors, the Spanish who ruled Spain, the Moors, Moorish. It wasn't until I'd left school that I realised what he meant, that he'd like some more of what he'd been eating. I could read before I went to school, and I could read very well. I was incredibly good at mathematics in the sense of mental arithmetic. And the teacher could give me a list of 20 numbers, and I could remember them and repeat them back to her. Or if she asked me to add them all together, I could virtually do that as well. I had a very vivid imagination. The village school was quite a school, and I'd said about the fighting and that, but there was a lot more to it than that. Basically, we were all very good friends. We were village kids. And we'd get up to a lot of mischief. I mean, I always say that I played doctors and nurses so many times that I was made an honorary member of the medical profession. But anyway, that's a different kind of story. But one of the things that happened was one of the little girls, well, I won't say what her name was, but she was from a Roman Catholic family and they were very strict. And she'd never seen a little boy in all its glory. And one day, two of the girls in the village that I played with said we were all going to play mothers and fathers, and we were the children, and we were supposed to go to bed up in the loft of the barn. And they suggested that we should get undressed and get under the blanket, which we did. And then Melanie came upstairs, and the girls stood up, so I stood up, and they dropped the blanket. The other little girl was quite impressed, I think, but she just ran laughing all the way home. I used to get into all kinds of scrapes. When I was about 7, the most incredible thing happened to me. behind the houses where there was a small holding of a farm, and then there was a wood behind the houses. And one day I was playing in the wood, and there was this incredible smell, and it was wood violets. And I remember seeing them, the vivid violet colour of the wood violets, and this incredible scent. And I remember kneeling down and just inhaling. And it really was a very spiritual experience. It's something I've never forgotten. I've never seen any wood violets since. I've never even smelt them since. But in my mind, I still see them occasionally, and I still smell the scent of wood violets. At the farm, the small holding, they had a television, and we didn't, so I was allowed to go down and watch the children's television programmes. But he had a big sheepdog, an Old English sheepdog, and she was a guard dog. So I had to be very careful when I was going to visit. Sorry about things moving. Because the sheepdog was quite capable of eating me alive, I think. Or at least that's what I feared. But I used to go down there on a winter's evening and sit watching television. And then going back home after the children's programmes had finished. And then eventually a young family moved in, or rather a father and his 3 children. And one of those was a little girl, and she was about my age. So we became both wild kids, roaming the marshes, roaming the woods, just spending most of our life together at one point. And I remember one night I stayed there because my parents were going somewhere else. And they had the Death Watch beetle in the walls. I don't know whether you know what a Death Watch beetle is. But it's a beetle that when it's looking for a maid and running through the passageways that it's made in the walls, it makes a clicking sound. Sort of just sounds like a tick. You know, like a little... And it's called Death Watch beetle is because when people were dying, it was believed that the beetle announced their death and would start ticking when somebody was dying in the house. I mean, if you think about it, it was just coincidence, probably. But I never forget that night, the idea of the Death Watch beetle. But I loved the loneliness of my childhood. Spent hours on the marshes, and I'm just going to finish with one story. I don't think I've told you about this before, but one day on the marshes there was a shovel, you know, a mechanical shovel, digging out the dikes to clear them of mud and laying it on the banks so that they flowed better. And it was the beginning of summer, and he had all the marshes to do. I don't know how old he was. He was older than me. I mean, you know, I thought he was quite an old man, but he might not have been. But he was a magician. He could do magic tricks. And about the second day, he saw me on the marshes and was having a tea break and called me over and showed me a couple of magic tricks. And the next day, asked me whether I wanted a cup of tea. And from then on, we used to meet regularly, and I'd have a cup of tea with him, and we just talked. And although I was young, we talked about life. We talked about the world. We talked about science and nature and all those things. And then one day, towards the end of summer, I went down on the marshes and he'd gone. It was almost like a bereavement. But it was one of the things I'm always grateful for the things that man taught me, and for the fact that he treated me like an adult, even though I was a child. And he smoked a pipe. And I've only just remembered that. But anyway, I think that's enough for now. God bless you all. May God's love pour down upon you. May his blessings fill your life. And may your God, whichever God you believe in, never ever let you go. And those of us who don't believe in God, well, we'll still be blessed with life in all its abundance. Good night.